Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Butternomics. I'm your host, Brandon Butler, founder and CEO of Butter ATL, and today we got somebody special in the building. The one, the only, attorney Gerald Griggs. Brother, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Butter. What's up, man? It's good to be here.
If I was any better, I'd be you, man.
No, I don't want to be better than me.
Now, look, this is going to be a good conversation. For those who don't know, man, attorney Griggs here, he is the former president for the NAACP for the state of Georgia. What's that like, brother? What's that like?
Ooh, stressful. It's sort of like being the firefighter, have to put out all the fires that are happening around the state, around civil rights. And it was an exciting 3 years, but I'm glad to transition into another role.
Now, just for context, I know you practice law also. What is your area of specialties in law? Is it civil rights? Is it something else?
So I mainly practice criminal defense, civil rights, some personal injury, and then I do a lot of social justice work. So.
Okay. All right, so we're going to get into it, man. We're going to get into it. So let me ask you, man, you're doing all this amazing work around the city, around the state. A lot of people say that Atlanta's the black Mecca. And I mean, Atlanta's a very special place. I've been here my whole life. I've seen it. But, you've seen the inside of systems. You've seen how things kind of work from the inside out, man. Do you think from a black Mecca standpoint, we're really in that space still? Is it changing? Is it transitioning? How do we make sure that that doesn't change if it is going away?
I mean, I think we still are the black Mecca, but I think we have a lot of work to do around wealth inequality and the things that are happening within Atlanta, the city, and then Metro Atlanta. And, being a native, a sixth generation Georgian, fifth generation Atlantan, I see changes, but I also see room for improvement that we could build on this beautiful city that we all call home.
Absolutely. Now again, you're dealing with civil rights and civil justice, all these different things. What's under attack right now in Georgia that people probably aren't paying attention to? I got some ideas, but I feel like you're going to know better than me, man. What is under attack? What are they going after right now in Georgia that people don't realize?
Number one, voting rights. Number two, erasure of black history. And number three, the erasure of black wealth. And I think people tend to look at Atlanta and look at Georgia and say there are a lot of African Americans doing very well here. But there are also a lot of African Americans who are just getting by. And there's an attack daily on diversity, equity, inclusion, erasing black history, trying to gerrymander and suppress the vote. So those are the main issues I see directly being impacted, not only on the national level, but more locally here in Georgia and Atlanta particularly.
Now, let's unpack that for a second because, I'm sure you see it in a certain kind of way. When you say there are these attacks happening on, voting rights and black wealth and erasing, what does that look like because, again, you see it from a different perspective. I think a lot of people just see it and they're like, oh, they're taking black history out of schools and stuff like that. But, what does it really look like from a system standpoint?
It looks like laws that are being passed to disenfranchise African Americans. So particularly, we have a lawsuit pending on two voter suppression bills, SB 202, which is known as Jim Crow 2.0, and then the more recent SB 189, which goes even further. So it's dealing with stuff like not being able to provide water and sustenance in lines, changing polling precincts, lowering the amount of drop boxes. Those are all things that were happened because of the law, and now we're suing. But then you also have redistricting and the prevention of being able to elect the candidate of choice because of the racial gerrymandering. So we at the Georgia State Conference, in my newest role, are now suing the state of Georgia. We have 6 lawsuits that are currently pending. And then you have the data centers that are popping up in predominantly African-American communities that are now polluting the water and the air. So these are some of the things that people hear about but don't know specifically how it's impacting them. We see that on a day-to-day basis, both in the practice of law as well as in civil rights and social justice. And then most importantly, what I see every single day is mass incarceration. I go from courthouse to courthouse all over this state, and I see a disproportionate number of African Americans, particularly African American men, being disproportionately impacted by the criminal legal system. And so those are the things that I warn people about on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes they understand, but typically when you see me, the dam is already broken, and now we got to figure out how to fix it.
Yeah. Now, I always say Atlanta ain't Georgia. Atlanta ain't Georgia. Atlanta's a great place. I went to school at Georgia Southern in Statesboro. So, I've seen lots of different parts of the state. You know what I mean? And so, But I guess when you talk about these laws being passed, like again, I'm just trying to unpack this a little bit for the people that aren't in like on the day to day like you, right? Like, what is how do these laws even get brought up like that? Because I think that's where people maybe are a little confused. Is they say, well, if these things are so bad, how are they even getting to the point to where people are actually trying to pass them? Like, what does that process look like?
Well, people have to understand, like you said, there's Atlanta and then there's Georgia. And so at the state level, you have the Georgia General Assembly, which is in session for 40 days. It's currently in session right now. And there are members of the Georgia General Assembly who want to roll Georgia back to a far gone era, whether that's the 1950s or the 1850s. They are continually putting up bills that sometimes pass and sometimes don't pass, and we're playing defense. I'll give you an example. We had one of the biggest protests in Georgia for Rayshard Brooks about body cams and social justice. And now there's a bill on the House floor, I think it's in the House Judiciary Committee, that would ban the release of body cam footage that shows a death. You know, we've been fighting for transparency for years, and now they want to roll it back because they don't want to harm the family by showing the last moments of somebody's life in a police-involved situation, which of course is counterintuitive because the only reason we're getting justice in some of these cases is because we see the video and the video goes viral. So that's an example. But what I think people need to understand and pay closer attention to is how these bills matriculate to become law. And that's why you have to watch the Gold Dome. You have to make sure that you are aware of what's being voted on, what's potentially being passed, and then what the people you elect are actually doing. You know, I'm a big proponent of voting, but voting is just the first step in civic engagement. You also have to hold the individuals accountable once they are elected, and that's why it's incumbent on people to know what's happening at the Gold Dome.
You know, you said something interesting. You said that we're kind of playing defense out here because people. It almost sounds like, and again, like correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost sounds like what you're saying is like people are almost putting up bills that probably aren't going to pass, but it's almost like shots on goal, right? Yeah. It's like I'm gonna throw these out there and I'm gonna see if y'all really paying attention, or like maybe attach it to something else and try to see like is this kind of things, are these kind of things that are happening?
That's absolutely what happens. And so we just had crossover day, I believe last week, and some bills, so in order for a bill to become law, it has to pass the House and then pass the Senate. And so when it passes one house of the legislature, it crosses over. Well, sometimes bills don't cross over, and so they get attached to other bills so they can live on. And that's where you get the shots on goal, as you just said. So maybe I have diversity, equity, inclusion ban that I want to get through. So I just attach it to a housing bill. And everybody wants affordable housing, so you just put a little pork in the bill and say, oh, you're going to have affordable housing, but we're going to ban diversity, equity, inclusion, which means now people can discriminate on who's getting the housing. So those are some things that people need to be wary of, but they also need to be focused on the other things that are happening. You know, attempts to increase mass incarceration by building more detention centers. Now, currently, the detention centers are being built for immigration customs enforcement, but we all know that for private prisons to remain profitable, they're going to have bodies in there. So it may not just be for immigration, customs, and enforcement. So those are things that people need to watch for. All the buzzwords you hear that are happening have some amount of legislation attached to them. So when we talk about what's happening in Washington, it's happening in Georgia as well. And so people have to watch out for that. People have to understand and follow groups like the NAACP and the ACLU of Georgia so they can tell you, okay, this bill is in committee. This bill is passed over. This bill is at your city council where we're talking about whether that's zoning or raising the millage rate and how it affects you. Those are things that people need to know about because it disproportionately affects your way of life, and then ultimately how you're going to provide a better life for your family, provide education, and those type of things.
You know, I think a lot of people aren't as involved in some of the day-to-day stuff, and they kind of just go off of, you know, high-level themes and buzzwords, right? And for them, it just all falls down to Republicans and Democrats, right? Like, yeah. I mean, it sounds like, again, like these things are happening on all kinds of levels, but, you know, my guess is that there's a lot of people from both sides being involved in some of these different things. Like, how do we kind of hold the people that are making the laws more accountable, and also just make sure that people stay educated, because again, a lot of people I think are just intimidated. It's almost like, it's almost like golf, I say sometimes, right? If you don't understand a sport, you feel like it's intimidating until you get in there. Like, how can we get people to be less intimidated and stay engaged so that they're not asleep at the wheel while these things are kind of happening and trying to be snuck through?
So I think people need to pick whatever issue is important to you. If the issue is taxes, of course that happens on the local, the state, and the federal level, depending on which city you live in. But if the issue is education, it's happening all over. You need to pick the issue. So if your issue is you believe that African American studies or Black history is being removed from schools, local school board, those are the individuals that are making the decision. And it doesn't matter if they're a Democrat or Republican, they're still trying to control our students' education. If the issue is, mass incarceration, that's typically a county issue or a state issue. So the county court system or the Georgia General Assembly. So you just got to know where your issue is, and in order to stay abreast of what's happening, focus specifically on the issue that is most important. If the issue is economic advancement or wealth building, that's the General Assembly. They got to figure out how they're going to spend the $12 billion budget that they have. So I think that people, golf is hard, but once you just learn how to putt,
Right.
you learn how to drive, you learn how to chip, you learn how to your short game, you start putting it together and realize the game isn't that hard. It's the same thing in politics and in social justice and civil rights. Once you figure out which right is affected, you find out which venue to enforce that right. And I think it becomes a lot easier and it opens up.
You kind of mentioned something about private prisons and these. And I always think that's such an interesting topic, because people don't really realize. I think people, again, when they don't pay attention, they don't really realize that there are corporations that literally own some of these prisons and detention camps. And to your point, they're not profitable if they're not empty. Like, you just expound on that a little bit. Like, tell people like how that private prison system actually works.
So in Georgia, there are at least 2 private prisons owned by CCA. And what happens is they have a contract with the state to provide bed space for, individuals that have been incarcerated for violations of the law. And so they have to keep the facility open and profitable. In order for the facility to be open and profitable, they have to incarcerate individuals. So what people need to understand, in Georgia, we have the highest rate of any other state of people on either probation or parole. It's community control. And then we also have a large population of individuals that are currently housed in the Department of Corrections. And so when you understand that, and it's a business, you understand now that I need to be engaged with the people who are making the decisions on which violations of the law will get you incarcerated in either a public prison run by the state or a private prison run by a contractor with the state. So they need to be engaged with their local elected officials, both the county commission and the judges, because they make the determination on how much funding goes into the county court system. And then also at the state level, your state senators and state representatives who determine what is in fact a violation of law. And then your state level judges, which are the Court of Appeals and Supreme Court. So I think that what people need to understand is the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery, except for incarceration based on a conviction. They are still using certain individuals for labor for the state to private entities. So if you see people on the side of the road cutting the grass and you see state probation or you see state prisoner, just think that's the 13th Amendment in action. And we need to understand how it works and how it affects us in our day-to-day lives, so we stay engaged and say, this is not over my head. This is, my cousin. This is my sister, my sister-in-law, who is now in the system, who are being profited off of by private entities that are using that labor or housing their bodies.
Did I hear you correctly when you said that Georgia has the highest probation rate?
Has the highest number of people on state control, which means either probation or parole, in the country.
How does that happen?
Because it's Georgia. You come on vacation, you end up on probation. And so you just need to understand that the Georgia criminal justice system is a well-oiled machine, and it's running very effectively. And we have the absolute responsibility to make sure that we uphold people's civil rights and we make sure that this system is not disproportionately incarcerating our people for unjust reasons.
Yeah. Now, when you think about things like people say, protect black power and protect black wealth, like what does that mean in dollars? Especially, and I'm kind of asking because it takes money to fight these cases. It takes money to get people out there, right? Like, what does it really cost to fight for like voting rights and people's rights here in Georgia? Like, kind of give us a number and help us quantify that a little bit.
I mean, that costs millions
Yeah.
because we have to hire law firms and lawyers to litigate. We have to collect the data. We have to make sure we register individuals who've been purged from the rolls. We have to make sure we monitor city council meetings, county commission meetings, legislative hearings, and then ultimately go into the court system and file the action. So I think on any given year, an organization will probably spend 300 to 400,000 a year protecting those entities. And then when we're in an election year, it even goes up because we got to mobilize the vote. We got to make sure folks are registered, and we got to make sure people get back out to the polls for the runoff. So it is a very expensive endeavor, and that's why organizations like the NAACP and others always solicit donations because, great man once said, freedom's not free. And that's why we have to make sure we fund those organizations. So what does it mean to build black wealth? It means to reinvest in the organizations that help create black wealth and black opportunities from the very beginning. And there's none bigger than the NAACP, who fought Jim Crow, who ended segregation, who ended up making sure that there was an opportunity for folks to have the ability to be entrepreneurs and to make their own wealth or go into corporate America. So I think that what it means to build black wealth is to reinvest in black systems that created the vehicle towards black liberation.
Yeah. Now, people hear terms like lawsuit all the time. I know. I mean, you can't turn on the radio here in Atlanta without hearing 9,000 commercials. But I think what happens is sometimes people kind of misunderstand. And I know a lawsuit can also be a tool because you've kind of mentioned that you all use and file lawsuits against these different. Like, help us understand, how does a lawsuit actually help fight against some of these things? Like, because I think, again, a lot of times people just say, oh, they're just suing somebody for money. Like, no, how is a lawsuit actually a vehicle or a tool to help you fight for rights in people's cases?
Yes, I mean, there's two ways you can file for a lawsuit. Sometimes you are seeking monetary damages, and sometimes you're seeking equitable relief. Many times we're suing for equitable relief. That means if a law we believe is unconstitutional, we want to sue to overturn the law. So many times in most of our lawsuits, we're not suing for monetary damages. We're suing to make the government do something, to declare a law unconstitutional, to order the polls open for another hour extended so people can access the poll, to make sure that there are fair districts drawn so you can elect the candidate of choice. Those are all the type of lawsuits that we are engaged in. So when you hear the term lawsuit, we're not talking about car wreck cases. Those are the commercials you hear. And shout out to the car wreck lawyers. I love y'all's commercial. Amy Witherite and some others. Y'all keep doing what you're doing. Top Dog too. But when we're talking about filing lawsuits, we're talking mostly in federal court to enforce a constitutional right. Sometimes in state court to enforce a statutory right that's given by either the Georgia Constitution or statutes in the state to maintain the rights of citizens, so the citizen doesn't have the state overreaching in some capacity.
Okay. Now, when you're fighting these different cases, obviously, like I said, this stuff takes money. But like, where does the money come from? Because I know it can't all come through donations, or they're like corporate partners, or they're different organizations. Like, how is this stuff help funded so that we can keep the fight going?
Most of the time it is donations, but then we do have corporate sponsorships for some of the events, not the lawsuits, and then some of the lawyers donate their legal ability for the case. So we have partnerships with other 501c3 organizations that are primarily legal arms, and so that's how we fund it sometimes. And then sometimes we just have to figure out how we're going to raise the funds to pay the lawyers. Yeah. So it's the good thing about the NAACP is we've been around, for 117 years. So we've developed partnerships with the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, of course, the LDF, which came out of us, the Legal Defense Fund. We have a great partnership with them. And then the newer organizations that have come around who are now being more proactive in filing lawsuits. We've developed relationships, but for the most part, it's self-funded through donations or in-kind services.
So, if I'm a black business owner in Atlanta or in Georgia, again, in general, like what is happening right now that's hitting my bottom line that I might not even be noticing?
Well, I mean, we all see the rollbacks on diversity, equity, inclusion, and that's not just admissions into schools, whether that's colleges or professional schools. That's grant funding. So they've removed the ability to identify minority groups in receiving grant funding, both on the federal level and are now pressuring states to do it on the local and state level. And so that sucks up all of the money that was going to small businesses for entrepreneurship that have been systemically disenfranchised for decades. So as a small business owner, where you used to be able to get a small business loan from the SBA, you can't use that program anymore because it's considered what is the term there? Reverse racism at this point.
Which is a crazy term.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so those are the things that people don't really realize are happening, but you see it happening in real time. Another thing that people don't realize, and this kind of shifts into the voting rights space, this current administration is pushing to roll back election observers. So, the Department of Civil Rights and the Justice Department has nonpartisan election observers. They want to take those out for the for the midterms. And why is that important? Because we hear people hollering election integrity, but you don't want the independent observers to make sure people are able to exercise their constitutional right to access to the ballot. Those are some of the things that are happening. And primarily, the individuals that are being disenfranchised are people of color, particularly African Americans.
Yeah, because again, think about it, right? Like we talk about like these voting rights being rolled back, or access to the polls being open, or water. I mean, the most basic level. I mean, look, a lot of us are blessed to kind of have corporate jobs. We sit behind computers, but there are some people that need to take their lunch break to go vote. There are some people that can't vote until after they get off work, and so all of a sudden, if you're shortening that time, or they got to be out there, and I mean, we know how these Georgia summers get. You know what I'm saying? It's hot. I can't even get water because that's somehow considered to be, impacting vote. Yeah, like these things are crazy. I think that's the stuff that people don't realize. They think it's not a big deal, but it really is a big deal because on the flip side, a lot of candidates, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, tend to rely on absentee ballots and absentee voting, and a lot of times that ends up being older individuals. They might be retired, they might be white, right? Who can literally don't have to go wait in line. So it's like they can kind of still, now obviously there's still things they're trying to do around the absentee ballots to try to even like infringe on that a little bit, but it seems like that kind of gets left alone so that the people that actually have to go out and vote, they make it harder for you to go out and vote. Am I kind of understanding that correct?
You're absolutely correct. And we're going to set aside absentee mail-in ballots for a moment and just focus on that. So if you're not providing the fiscal financing for more voting machines in certain communities, the lines are going to be longer. And when you have primary elections or the general election in November, the weather is going to start to be a factor. So if you only have 3 voting machines for a polling precinct that serves 1,500 people, now you got people standing outside. And it wasn't until I moved into different places in the community and lived different places, I had become used to standing in line to go vote. Well, now I live in a community where they don't ever have to stand in line. You go in, there's 10 voting machines, you go vote, you're out in 5 minutes. But then I go look in certain other communities and there's a line wrapped around the building. That's intentional. Now let's shift back to absentee ballots. You have big counties like Fulton County that during the 2020 election had 12 absentee drop boxes. Now with the new law, that's been dropped to 3, and they're inside the building, have to be viewed, and you can only vote from 7 to 7 during the time you would normally vote. So it's shortening the access, shortening the runway, shortening the ability to vote. And then they also cut the early vote time. So, when you used to have almost 4.5, 5 weeks to early vote, now it's cut down to three weeks, one Saturday or Sunday. You can start to see we're shortening the access to make sure that a certain group of people are systemically disenfranchised. That's important for people to understand. It's surgical, it's directed, and we have to recognize that it's to impact us. Another thing that's happening, there's a big to-do about the SAVE Act, wanting voter ID. Let's be clear, Georgia already has voter ID. But what the SAVE Act would do is require a federal ID that's not the same ID as we have right now. So the real ID is not linked to your citizenship. So now you'd have to go get your citizenship papers, meaning your birth certificate, Social Security, if you already have a passport, and go get a new ID, which you're going to have to pay for the ID. So $33 for a new ID or $130 for a passport. That sounds familiar. So I did some research. Do you know how much the poll tax was in Georgia in 1946?
How much was that?
$1. Now, if we pass the SAVE Act, you're going to have to spend either $33 or $120 to get an ID to now vote in Georgia. That's a poll tax. And so what I think people need to understand is it's the same game, just different players, different tools to enact the same consequences. Because let's be clear, voting is supposed to be free. That's based on the constitutional amendment. We're not supposed to be infringed upon the ability to have access based on race or certain other protected classes. But we're seeing it happen in real time, and the people need to understand this is why it's important to hold your elected officials accountable. This is why it's important to read the bills or get with somebody who can read the bill to interpret what the bill is saying so you can get it directly.
So again, I just want to play that back for 1 second. So what you're telling me is if they pass this bill, then your driver's license isn't enough. You literally have to go get a new ID that you have to pay for. So you have to go stand in line because we all know what it's like to go to DMV to get the license. You got to go get another ID just to be able to vote. Am I understanding?
So this ID has a little star on it, which means the real ID. But when you got this real ID, nobody checked your citizenship status.
Right.
So now you have to go back and have your citizenship status changed and put on the ID American citizen, proof of citizenship, which is a new ID, which is going to cost you some more money.
Again, man, I'm trying to think right now where my Social Security card is, where my birth certificate is. You know what I mean? It's like you got to go.
Got to go back to Mama's house. So that's where it is. She got in that safe deposit box. Yeah.
Man, this stuff is now. Recently, I know there was a situation where I believe the FBI even raided, here in Georgia and raided just. Well, get into the specifics, but can you explain to people what just happened in that situation and what it means? Because again, I think they just see the headlines and then it's the news cycle, right? It pops up and then it goes away. Like, what happened?
So the current president of the United States for the last 6 years has been stating without evidence that there was massive rampant voter fraud in Fulton County. Right. And there were 60 lawsuits that were litigated. There was no evidence of voter fraud. In fact, there were 2 audits and the Secretary of State did an investigation, found no evidence of voter fraud. In fact, in Georgia, I forget the exact year. I want to say it's since 2012, there have been 6 reported incidents of voting that would amount to voter fraud. Mm-hmm. That is 1% of 1% of 1%. Now, remember, we have millions of people voting. 6. So what happened here was the FBI, under the direction of the Justice Department, wanted to go and get the ballots from the 2020 election. And so they got a warrant from a federal judge and seized the voting machines, the ballots, the fingerprint cards, and other information that was being housed in South Fulton in the voter elections hub. Voters in Fulton County had no idea this was going to happen. And so everybody's up in arms because that's the actual voting data. It's all of our information is now in the hands of the federal government for whatever reason. I have no idea. The chain of custody has now been broken because, again, you're supposed to maintain the chain of custody on these elections machines as well as the actual ballots. So if there is some question, we can go back through it. You can go match people up, say this person voted for that person. We can do all that through an audit. We can't do that now. So Fulton County filed a lawsuit to get it back. The NAACP filed a lawsuit to get it back because we don't know what the federal government is going to do with this. Elections under the Constitution are run by the state, not the federal government. What we have is an attempt to federalize elections, and that's concerning considering that we are a country of laws that have policies and statutes in place that determine how an election is conducted. Even in a federal election for president, it's handled by the state. The state picks their slate of electors to elect the president of the United States. It's not, so that's why we're called the United States. And what confuses me, and we're not going to be partisan here, we're just going to put it out there. For individuals that believe in limited government, which is what conservatives believe in, why do you want the overreaching of the federal government in the most fundamental of things, elections? Listen, if there is evidence of voter fraud, don't you think the Republicans who won the election in 2020 would have found evidence of voter fraud? Or was it just in one race? Because I'm confused. If there was rampant voter fraud in Georgia, it was the dumbest voter fraud ever because the progressives lost. They lost. They lost every major race with the exception of president and one senator. And then, of course, in 2021, they won another senator. But where is the evidence of this? There wasn't rampant voter fraud. There were 60 cases. There was a judge down in Henry County that viewed all this. His name is Judge Amaro, a very fine jurist, a very conservative, who said there was no evidence. So my question is, why are we taking the ballots from 2020 when there have been elections in 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, and now 2026 since then, and there's been no evidence of voter fraud? So what I want people to understand is this is the first step in attempting to federalize elections so you can determine the outcome of the election, and we need to be concerned.
Now, you've got a lot of tools in your tool belt, right? Like you think about, litigation, organizing, media pressure, boycotts, like which one of those, or is it something else that, like, in your opinion, really kind of moves the needle when you're trying to make change? It could be a combination of all. It could be one more than the other. What do you think?
I think in the history of the current movement, I think a combination of protest, meaning actual marches and rallies, and then economic resistance has been most successful. I'll give you an example. 2020 was an exceptional election, but that was because we had been marching in the streets since Brunswick. So we had Brunswick, you had Louisville, you had Minneapolis, and then you had Atlanta, and everybody was outside. And so we transitioned that engagement into a march to the polls in November. And so I think that has been successful. And then to see the rise of economic understanding that our dollars fuel this economy and we can withdraw it. I give you an example, even though there's a lot of debate going on right now, the Target boycott. It's been highly successful. It's the most successful boycott since the last boycott. And of course, it's still going on. And so I think in this generation, I think those are some things that we can point to directly in Atlanta, in Georgia, that are part of the greater national conversation that shows that protest, mobilization, and then economic withdrawal have been successful.
Okay. If you're a black professional and you're seeing, DEI getting taken out of everything, from defunded to schools to education to workplace, like what should you be doing right now? Like, how can you get active in trying to combat that?
Be your ancestors. Come off the sideline. I mean, and that's a real critique, because let's be clear, our ancestors did more with less. We would not have the gains that we have right now but for the work of our ancestors. I'll be clear on that. I was born in 1978, which means I'm the first person in my family born with all my rights. But if we continue to sit on the sidelines, we will be the last individuals in our family born with all of our rights. I know Atlanta is a black mecca. A lot of us feel like we've arrived, big house, big car, big title, big big everything. We vacation wherever we want to go. But if you don't see what's happening to you, or more importantly, what's going to happen to your children, you need to check yourself because your grandparents didn't fight Jim Crow. Your parents didn't overcome in the 60s and the 70s for you just to be comfortable in 2020, the 2020 is saying, oh, I got mine, I got to get the bag. It's great to get the bag, but they got the bag and got change. Mm-hmm. So as we see many of our ancestors transitioning to become part of the ancestral plane, we got to ask ourselves, what are we going to do? What are we willing to do? I know plenty of people are saying, they're part of the 92%, so they're going to sit this one out. How's that working out for you? Right. 300,000 African-American women have lost their jobs. It's not time to sit it out. What we have to understand is when America catches a cold, Black America gets the flu. We need to understand who we are, whose we are, and what time it is. It's time for us to come off the sideline. That doesn't mean everybody need to go outside and protest. I'm for protesting. I love protesting. Y'all know when I'm not wearing a suit, I got my A hat on marching down the street. But we also have to have conversations in these boardrooms. It was a lot of promises made in 2020 with George and Breonna and how things were going to be different. Certain institutions putting painting stuff on football fields and basketball courts about change and be love and all these things. Meanwhile, we got kids in cages. We got folks in mass incarceration. We added more names since George, and all these institutions are quiet. Y'all in them boardrooms, why you not saying nothing? You in the classrooms teaching these children, why you not saying nothing? Our ancestors refused to be quiet. They refused to allow a future where we didn't have rights. We need to do the same thing. So my message to the Black professionals, it's time to come off the sideline. I see a lot of y'all talking. I don't see a lot of y'all doing anything.
I talk to my friends all the time about the idea that we're not that far removed from not only slavery, but like lack of Jim Crow rights. I mean, my parents grew up drinking out of, segregated water fountains. Yeah. My grandparents had even more things. I mean, we're, two and a half, maybe 3 generations removed at most?
We're a generation and a half away from Jim Crow. Right. We are 3 generations away from slavery. And so when you put it into context like that, we have to, here's the thing that makes me kind of chuckle sometimes. So you had the 60s where we were in the middle of, basically it was freedom generation. Mm-hmm. And then you had the 70s where, it got a little dark. The 80s, they lulled us back to sleep. It wasn't until the later part of the 90s, folks started getting conscious. And now we're here. So we really only had a generation of somewhat improvement. And now we're seeing the backlash. We have to recognize the time that we're in, use the tools that we have been given. Our ancestors gave us, because you think about what your grandmama and your mama told you. Boy, go to school, get an education, and do what? Bring it back to your community. Right. Why are we not doing that? Why are we not saying, okay, we saw what our ancestors did with so little, and how do we make sure that our descendants look at us the same way we looked at them? And so I just think that we just need to have a real conversation with ourselves and really say, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. I'm from Georgia. My great-great-great-grandfather was a slave. He was a slave in Georgia. I'm sure as he's looking down right now, he's happy to say his great-great-great-grandson is a civil rights attorney. Mm-hmm. But what is he saying that I'm going to do for my son and my daughter? The thing that really touched me was when Georgia was trying to erase African-American AP classes. My daughter called me. She was a senior. She said, Dad, I signed up for AP African-American Studies, and they're talking about taking it out of school. What are you going to do? I said, hold on, baby, let me get on the phone. And I called down to the state superintendent's office and said, either you put this back on the books or we're going to sue you, because nothing in Georgia law says that you can ban this. Guess what happened? They taught AP African American history, and I had to go to that class and teach them about the African American history that they witnessed to get to the point that they could learn it. So I think that it's using those talents, using those skills, building our black businesses, building our black professionals to work together. We shouldn't be isolated in silos. You know, there are more African American lawyers, more African American doctors, more African American pharmacists, more African American engineers in this generation than we ever had. Why are we not all coming together to say, you know what? Oh, y'all getting rid of the diversity, equity, inclusion? Okay, we're gonna fund it ourselves. Because we got that type of black wealth to do it. You know, people talk about, oh, we don't have Black Wall Street anymore. Okay, we still got Auburn Avenue. Why don't y'all go on down there? We can build it digitally. Why don't we do that? You know, I think we need to reimagine what it means to be responsible for the next chapter in black history.
You know, we kind of talked about this earlier. Your term as the president of the Georgia NAACP ended late last year. Is there anything you can say now that you couldn't say then when you kind of speaking for the institution about where things are?
I think what I just said, I couldn't be as direct as I am right now. I couldn't say, hey, y'all, the house is on fire and we need firefighters, and y'all sitting just watching. But I also respect the institution. I realize that it produced W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells and Dr. King and so many others that we've gone on to see as legends. But I also understand that sometimes you got to go outside to affect more change and then come back inside. So I think that the main thing that I would say that I can say now that I couldn't say then directly is we have a clear and present threat in the White House that needs to be addressed. And it's time for us to address it. Nobody's coming to save us. They never have, and they never will. We became the superheroes that we were looking for. You know, I don't think W.E.B. Du Bois woke up one day and said, oh, I'm going to be W.E.B. Du Bois. No, he said, there was a problem. I got to address it. Ida said, it's strange fruit all over the place. I have to journal about this. I have to talk about this so that my people understand. And so I think that we need a new generation of that so that we can, one, talk about it, and then two, do something about it so that one day, 100 years from now, these people are talking about us like, man, y'all remember what our ancestors did in the 2020s? They was like, man, we're not doing none of this. So they broke a corporation. They led biggest marches ever. They flipped elections, and then they ran for office and became the first African-American governor from the state of Georgia, a former slave state, and then they changed the course of American history. Because here's the thing, and I think black people don't understand this well enough. If the black people in Georgia and the black people in Alabama and the black people in Mississippi and the black people in Florida and the black people in South Carolina and Virginia and North Carolina and Virginia all get together, we can flip any election. You can't suppress your way out of that if we all vote. So what's your excuse? Oh, man, voting don't work. Oh, okay. Y'all see we are at war now. I guess it does work. So either you're going to vote or your kid's going across the seas. Which one is it? We cannot sit here and be intellectually dishonest about the tools that our ancestors gave us. We have to use them.
And people don't realize that a lot of times, at least this is what I've always been told, is that a lot of times in order to win an election, it's not always about, you know, getting more votes. A lot of times the strategy is just to get people not to take action at all.
Yes.
So when you hear people say stuff like, "Oh, I'm not," you're playing into the strategy of just not taking action. Like they're gonna go vote, and now all of a sudden we got more people sitting at home.
And that's the thing that it puzzles me, because if the power was not there in the vote, why would they be telling you not to do it? And for those, and there's a social influencer who went viral on a commentary about voting. He shall remain nameless, but I believe he says he opened in a school somewhere in Philadelphia, but his school is not really open. And he said, well, I couldn't vote for this person, I couldn't vote for this person, so I didn't vote at all. Let's start holding our thought leaders more accountable. Regardless if you didn't feel like voting in the presidential election, you didn't vote for governor, you didn't vote for your county commissioner, your sheriff, your district attorney, all of these other things on the ballot, that's being intellectually dishonest. And we have to critique that. We have to call it out. And I love the brother, but some people don't know what they're talking about. And so we need to allow the experts to come into the room and have the real conversation. And as a people, we need to hold our elected officials accountable after we elect them, because that's what people are upset about. They're saying, well, I voted and nothing happened. Well, you're supposed to vote, and then you're supposed to hold them accountable to the campaign promises they made. You're supposed to show up at every board meeting, at every city council meeting, at every state legislative meeting, at every congressional meeting, and say, hey, you remember on the campaign trail when you came to the community center or you came to the church and you said X, Y, and Z? Where is that? Because if you don't do it, we're going to unseat you. And we don't have to wait till an election. In Georgia, you just need 30% to recall somebody. So if they're not doing what you need to do, you just unseat them. Though that's the type of power that we have. And when we unleash it, let me be clear. There's enough registered African Americans in this state to win any election. There are 2.2 million registered active voters. A gubernatorial race is usually won with 1.7 to 1.9 million. It's 2.2 million. So if we're talking about any of these issues, voting rights, reparations, if we're talking about economic infusion of dollars into the black community, we have the power because we have the numbers. Politicians only listen to one thing: voters. So if you take yourself out of that equation, they're not listening to you. And so all I'm trying to get across to our people is that we have to be more intelligent with the power that we have and wield it. And I promise you, you will see changes. And if you don't, unseat that person. It's really that simple. And then we can get back to what we like to do best in Atlanta. And that's say we black excellence, black wealth, black all those things. But now we actually have the wherewithal to back it up.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've been in rooms with some powerful people. You see how things operate at the highest level. Like, what's something you noticed about how those people operate that other people might not realize?
Usually, when you're at the table with individuals that have a high level of power, you need to understand that we're all intellectually the same. It's not like great genius is at the table. They trying to figure it out just like you are. They want to know, okay, what's the issue in the community and how we best can address it and how we can get everybody on board with the idea. That's what I learned the most in being at tables. And many of the time, some of the people at the table didn't get there the way we expected them to get there. It wasn't earned. And so I think that we as a people need to be more bold in demanding a seat at the table or creating our own table and forcing them to come to ours.
You know, it seems like Georgia always ends up kind of being like the proving ground for some of this stuff. You know, DEI, voting rights, criminal justice. Why do you think that is?
Because we're the birthplace of civil rights. What people need to understand, what happened in Georgia. What happened in Georgia is Sherman came through Georgia and burned Atlanta to the ground and then marched to the sea. And guess what happened after Sherman burned Atlanta to the ground? All those beautiful black people that were toiling in the fields in South Georgia and Middle Georgia and even in Metro Atlanta came to Atlanta and built this city. From the ashes grew the phoenix. Well, the phoenix wasn't just a white bird. It was a multicultural bird, but more than likely it was brown. Right. And so we rebuilt this city, and then we took the city. Yeah. But not only took the city, because I know there's a lot of gentrification going on in this city, but I need y'all to think a little bit harder, because folks that's from Atlanta understand that we just moved out. So if you were from Southwest Atlanta, you probably live in Cobb, South Cobb, or Douglasville. If you were from East Atlanta, you just moved into Decatur, Stone Mountain. If you were from North Atlanta, well, really, there ain't no such thing as North Atlanta.
I just told somebody that yesterday.
There's no such thing as North Atlanta.
Told somebody that yesterday.
But you might have moved to Gwinnett, or you moved up into North Fulton. But it's a lot of black people in Metro Atlanta. And I'm going to let y'all know a real secret. There are a lot of black people in this state. There's not a city that I haven't been in Georgia where I am not surprised at the number of African Americans I see. And I've been to Montezuma, I've been to Statesboro, I was just in Lowndes and Brunswick. It's black people everywhere. And what we are all not having a conversation about is the amount of power that we have. Majority of the cities in Georgia are run by black mayors. I'm sure you didn't know that. A majority of the cities in Georgia. Yeah. And so if we're running local cities, why can't we run the whole state? That's what 26 is about. Now, again, I'm not getting behind any candidate for governor, but I want people to understand that we can do something that's never been done in Georgia. We can make Georgia Atlanta. People talk about, oh, it's the black Mecca. Well, yeah, Atlanta's being gentrified. Okay, where did all those black people go? They didn't just disappear. Yeah, they in the metro area, or they down in South Georgia, or they in Middle Georgia. Let's send a message. You're right. Atlanta, Georgia is the proving ground. Let's send a message to the rest of the country that Georgia didn't turn blue, it turned black, and the black people have something to say.
Man, you know what? Like, look, I had another question for you, but I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna end it right there, man. I like that. Georgia turned black, and we had that opportunity. Attorney Griggs, thank you so much, man. For those that want to, get involved, follow you, support, get more. Like, where can they find you, man? Give them all the things.
All social media at Attorney Griggs on all social media channels. You can hit me up on the website www.geraldagriggs.com. We've launched a new podcast where we will be talking about justice called Justice for the Series. That's on all streaming platforms, but particularly on YouTube. And let's convene. And what I want to leave everybody with is I know we've been having an intensive conversation about black. And I'm intentional in centering that because we know that when the black people get engaged, everybody's rights get protected. It's time for us to protect everybody's rights. Let's have a real conversation. Let's push back on what we believe is the encroachment on civil rights. And let's get back to the business that our ancestors so feverishly fought for. And that's the advancement of our people. Because when our people advance, all people advance.
Absolutely, man. Look, this has been a great conversation. This has been one of my favorite conversations. Thank you so much for coming in, Attorney Griggs. This has been really good. I've learned a lot. I'm sure the people listening learned a lot, man. And look, let's go out here and do it, y'all. With that said, that's the pod, y'all. We out. Peace.